Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today for the New Mexico Wildlife Viewer Survey webinar. We'll just give a few moments for everyone to get in here, and then Jenny will do an introduction.
All right, Jenny, I think you could probably go ahead and get started. And as anyone else comes in, we'll let them into the room, but we have most of who we're expecting.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much. Thanks to everyone who is here this morning, and special thanks to Dr. Dare and her team at Virginia Tech. They have been doing so much work on this national wildlife viewer survey, and of course we're all here today to learn about the New Mexico specific portion of the survey work that they've been doing. And I just wanted to say a couple things about New Mexico Department of Game and Fish and our interest in this survey work. I'm Jenny Seamster in the Ecological and Environmental Planning Division here at New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, and we have a program in our division called Share with Wildlife. It is a donation-based grant program, and it focuses on funding research, education, rehabilitation, and habitat enhancement projects related to species of greatest conservation need. And wildlife viewers are a group of people who I think could potentially be really interested in the Share with Wildlife program, but we don't currently do a great job of engaging with wildlife viewers specifically. And I think this survey is a really awesome first step towards better understanding the conservation interests and behaviors of wildlife viewers and helping the department to better engage with wildlife viewers, specifically to Share with Wildlife and the projects that we fund, but also more broadly. And in a broader context, we're also really interested in the results of this survey because, as many of you know, Recovering America's Wildlife Act, which is federal legislation, is under consideration this year. It's been passed in the House. We're hoping it might pass the Senate later this year. And if that passes, it will be a real game changer for all state wildlife agencies. And specific to New Mexico, it would effectively double our state agency budget. And one of the expectations with this additional funding is that all state wildlife agencies would be able to do a lot more work focused on species of greatest conservation need. And the other expectation is that we would all do even more than we're currently doing to better engage the whole spectrum and the whole diversity of members of the public who are interested in wildlife for all different sorts of reasons. And so again, this survey effort is a really great starting point to help us better understand some of the other groups of people who are interested in wildlife and who we can do much more to better engage. So with that, thank you again, Ashley, Emily, Christy, and all the other members of the Dare Lab who have worked on this survey and produced a really great report that's also available. And thank you again to everyone who's here today. Really appreciate your attendance and your time. And Ashley, I will turn it over to you guys.
Great. Thanks so much, Jenny. Appreciate the welcome and then also the context that you provided here for the survey effort in New Mexico. As Jenny said, this is part of a broader project that we've been involved in through a multi-state grant supported by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And then New Mexico Game and Fish was one of our state agencies that decided to be involved to an even higher level and have state-specific results. So you're actually our first state that's getting to see your state-specific results. So pretty exciting to be rolling this out to you all. And I'm hoping that here today we can have time for a conversation Our plan is to share with you background on why we conducted this survey, in addition to what Ginny's already said, then also share with you our methods, and then key insights and how we believe that that can really set the stage for some work that can be done in this state. Please do jot down as we go along other ideas you might have, other questions that you have for us, or you can also use the chat pod. We'll probably keep rolling through the presentation unless we notice something in the chat pod that needs to be addressed right away because it's causing confusion. But then we should have plenty of time for discussion. So we certainly hope to be able to have time to answer all your questions later. So let's start first by taking a look at the cover of the report that we're talking about here today. So just in the last week, the report for your state agency was released, and it's the New Mexico results of the Wildlife Viewer Survey. They are available online and already, I don't know what the number is, Emily, but was pushing towards 200 downloads yesterday already, which is pretty exciting that so many people are taking a look at this. So it's available as a PDF online. You can either scan that QR code, or Christy has also put the link in the chat pod so that you can have a copy to take a closer look later if you haven't already done so. But today we're going to share with you what we feel are the key highlights from that. But there's certainly a lot more to dig into, as well as the specific numbers that might be of interest to you to be able to cite in the future are all in there and can help you out in that way. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about our team. So presenting here today, myself, Ashley Dare. I am an associate professor at Virginia Tech in the Department of Fish and Wildlife Conservation. I'm a conservation social scientist or human dimensions researcher, and a lot of my work relates to wildlife recreationists. I also do work with private landowners and with other groups of people that have conservation behaviors or conservation interests. But certainly the wildlife recreationist and wildlife viewer audience is one that I've spent a lot of time studying. So it was very fun to be able to be involved in this broader scale survey effort with all of these state agencies, including yours. Emily Singular is a master's student working with me, and she is the lead author on this report. Emily spent a ton of time not only working all the way through the project of creating the survey and being involved in the implementation of the survey, but she, along with Christy, also put together all of the tables and figures that you can see in that report, and then worked on the text. And then Christy Patatsky, who's also on the call here today, is the co-author with Emily, who really have put so much effort into writing your report. And Christy's currently a research technician in our lab. And I realized, Christy, when I edited that, I misspelled technician. That's not her fault, that's my fault. And also an incoming PhD student in our lab. And so thanks so much to Emily and Christy. Additionally, Willa Chavez is another collaborator who helped with our regional and national level survey, Kelsey Jennings and Jessica Barnes, but they did not play an authorship role in the report. So you've got the three of us here today who know your New Mexico data quite well. So let me share with you a little bit more about our objectives from today. We want to help think about how you can use the survey findings as a profile of wildlife viewers in New Mexico, and think about how the agency or other partner organizations, I know some of you here today aren't from the Department of Game and Fish, can think about supporting wildlife viewers and engaging with them, broadening your relevance to wildlife viewers, particularly those who don't hunt and fish, so might not already have as strong of a relationship with the agency. And then also thinking about developing financial support opportunities for wildlife viewers, so that to the extent that their interests relate to financially supporting conservation in the state that the agency or others might be doing, that there's mechanisms that would be of interest to them to contribute to. So those are some of the key things that we're focusing in on here today. And as I said, there's even more in the report, but we thought that addressing these questions would be most relevant to you. So let me share with you a little bit of background that will be important for you as you go through the presentation. So first, what do I mean when I say wildlife viewing? So we built upon the definition of wildlife viewing from the National Survey of Hunting, Fishing, and Wildlife Related Recreation. which is conducted out of the U.S. Department of Interior, as well as a collaboration with the Census Bureau. And in their definition, they say that wildlife viewing is observing, feeding, and photographing wildlife, visiting parks or natural areas to observe, feed, or photograph wildlife, and maintaining plantings or natural areas around the home for benefits of wildlife. I recognize that some state agencies might not be interested in feeding wildlife, but that's still included as part of the definition of wildlife viewing. And we're able to look at the people who are involved in wildlife viewing from the observing versus the feeding versus the photographing aspects. All right, so let's talk about the trends in wildlife viewing. Probably a lot of you are aware that wildlife viewing is becoming even more popular on the national level as well as within your state. These same sort of trends follow. So 1/4 of the adult population in New Mexico reports that they view wildlife. And these aren't from our survey results, these are from the national survey of hunting, fishing, and wildlife related recreation that I just mentioned. Nationally, there's 14.3 million additional viewers that became involved in viewing from 2011 and 2016. A little of this difference is due to some differences in sampling between the 2011 and 2016 survey, but it's still believed that that trend is on the rise, as you can see, has happened since 1996. And a lot of that rise is coming from around the home wildlife viewing as even more people become involved in that. At the same time, hunting rates are declining or remaining stable, depending on what sort of hunting we are speaking about and what sort of region. So as agencies and organizations think about working with wildlife recreationists who can be strong supporters, these wildlife viewers are a great group to be thinking about working with. So in terms of the importance of studying wildlife viewers, Ginny already laid out her thoughts on how this ties specifically to New Mexico Game and Fish. As we spoke with the state agencies that we were working with on this project, we heard a variety of reasons. The graph that I just shared with you previously being one of those main reasons, viewers growing in number, and also their potential to have a lot of influence then within the conservation arena, within advocacy arenas, and being able to really be strong supporters of conservation efforts. They can also be difficult for agencies in particular to reach. Agencies have mechanisms like licensing systems where you can more easily reach those who hunt and fish, or in some cases, additionally boating, depending on the state. But there's not the same sort of licensing system for viewers, so you don't necessarily have a key way to just reach out and be in touch with them. There's also a lack of information on viewers' thoughts, preferences, and behaviors. The National Survey of Hunting, Fishing, and Wildlife-Related Recreation is really useful for telling us the numbers of participation and also number of days and financial impact, but there's not as much about people's thoughts and preferences. There have been some studies that have occurred with segments like just the bird watchers or within certain regions, but not a large scale study of viewers digging in on thoughts, preferences, and behaviors. So all of this information is important for helping be able to better serve and communicate with viewers and other underserved groups of people who might fall within that viewer category. And then also then connecting viewers to mechanisms where they can contribute financially or through volunteerism to state agencies and other organizations. So one of our first steps in this project was to do a literature review of the existing studies. And this was a project that Emily and another master's student who's been collaborating with us, Kelsey Jennings, played a really large role in doing. And so they review the literature that exists related to wildlife viewing, and that really helps set the stage for how we asked questions in the survey and how much we dug into certain topics. Highly recommend that you check this out as well if you're interested in learning more about what's known about viewers and everything from their demographics to their behaviors. And so again, Christy has put the link in the chat pod for you to check that out. All right, so with that background, I'm going to turn things over to Emily, who's going to tell you more about the methods for our study.
Oh, well, thanks for that background, Ashley. My name's Emily, and I'm really excited to be here. I'm actually from Albuquerque, So I really enjoyed getting to work on this project because it's so close to home. Right now, I'm going to walk through the survey methods and a little bit of an overview of our demographic and wildlife viewing behaviors before we shift into those key insights. So our survey instrument was designed and conducted in about 15 states, and we modified the text to be appropriate for New Mexico. We used a panel survey, which is an online platform of survey respondents who are recruited and retained and then compensated financially for completing the survey. We also used quotas to ensure a high quality of respondents, which I'll talk more about in some upcoming slides. The survey was conducted online from October to December of 2021. We had about 117 questions, and we had 1,016 good, complete respondents from New Mexico. After consenting to taking the survey, we began with a screening question, which we asked our respondents. This is a modified form of that definition of wildlife viewing, excuse me, which we just reviewed, which was a list of these 7 behaviors. And we asked respondents, which, if any, of the following forms of wildlife viewing have you participated in the past 5 years? If our respondents said, yes, I participated in feeding wildlife, feeding birds, or any of those other activities, they were allowed to take and complete the survey. If they hadn't done that, then they were removed from the survey, as we were only focused on wildlife viewers in New Mexico and not non-viewers. Those 117 questions covered a lot of topics. We looked at demographic characteristics, wildlife viewing behaviors and interests, the duration, location, and frequency of participation, so when and where, participation in other outdoor recreation, including OHV, the level of specialization of viewers, their viewing related expenditures for trips and other activities, barriers and social support to participation, like from family, friends, peers, and mentors. We looked at the likelihood of participating in conservation behaviors. We also wanted to use this survey to tap into wildlife viewers and their relationships with the state agency and NMDGF. We looked at their familiarity with, perceptions of, and trust in the agency, as well as their experience with programs and services provided by the agency. We also looked at their past financial contributions and the likelihood of making future financial contributions to NMGGF, as well as their likelihood to participate in conservation behaviors to support the agency. And finally, we also reviewed the wildlife viewers' preferred forms of viewing support and communication channels from NMDGF. After collecting and cleaning the data, we conducted our analysis in SPSS, the statistical package for social science, and we used 2 kind of main analysis. First, we looked at the statewide results, which was everyone in the sample. And second, we divided our respondents into 2 groups, consumptive and non-consumptive viewers, which I'll talk about more in the next slide. The report and the slides that you'll see today use these descriptive statistics and then chi-squared and t-tests to look at differences between these consumptive and non-consumptive viewers. And our data set is in the process of being put live online, so you'll be able to see all of the data that we collected and do your own analysis if you so wish. We decided to take a closer look at consumptive and non-consumptive viewers due to the difference in nature of these groups. We know that consumptive viewers are closely more tied to agency because of the public trust doctrine and the importance of purchasing license and permits to participate in activities like hunting and angling. In our survey, we defined non-consumptive viewers as those who had not hunted or fished in the past 5 years, whereas consumptive viewers have hunted or fished. So throughout the presentation, we'll have about 55% of our respondents in New Mexico were these non-consumptive viewers, and just a little under half, or 45% of them, were consumptive. Whenever you see those green boxes and the green bars on the graphs, that means we're talking about our consumptive viewers, and the purple is the non-consumptive viewers, so those who don't hunt or fish. To provide a little bit more of a breakdown of our consumptive viewers, our sample of consumptive viewers in New Mexico comprised of 30% of those who only fish and view wildlife. Just 3% of the respondents only hunt and view wildlife. And then 12% of the respondents fish, hunt, and view wildlife. For the rest of this presentation, we'll focus on that big picture of consumptive viewers, but we wanted to provide these breakdowns so you can see specifically what activities they're participating in. We also established demographic quotas for our survey in New Mexico. Quotas are used to ensure a high quality of respondents. In this survey, we matched our quotas against the 2016 national survey. We chose to set our quotas with the age, gender, and education of wildlife viewers in the 2016 survey to ensure we were being more representative of that sample. Our mean respondent age was 48 years old. About a quarter of our respondents were 18 to 34. 36% of our respondents were 35 to 54, and about half of them were over the age of 55. There was about an equal split between men and women in New Mexico, and we only had less than 1% of our respondents describe themselves as non-binary or prefer to self-describe. About 40% of our respondents reported having 4 years or more of higher education, and we have a more thorough demographic breakdown in the report. We also examined the ethno-racial identity of wildlife viewers. The vast majority of our survey respondents, 69% of them identified as white, and 30% identified as Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish. This was a lot higher than the 2016 national survey, where only about 5 to 10% of respondents reported being Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish. These race options were select all that applies, so you'll see that it adds up to way more than 100. And we had about 13% of our respondents ultimately be identified as multiracial, meaning that they selected one or more races. Finally, we also looked at the household income of wildlife viewers in New Mexico. Nearly half of the respondents reported their total income as $49,999 or less, while 21% reported a total household income of $100,000 or more. And finally, we looked at the residential location of wildlife viewers. This is when we're going to start seeing those graphs with our green and purple bars. We also tested the significant differences using a chi-squared between the consumptive and non-consumptive viewers. We didn't find any differences in if more consumptive or non-consumptive viewers lived in an urban area, small city, small town, or rural area. Now that we've reviewed demographics, we also wanted to talk a little bit about the forms of wildlife viewing our respondents participated in. Most respondents in New Mexico participate in wildlife viewing through visiting parks and natural areas, followed by photographing wildlife and feeding wild birds. We did choose to split the survey up between feeding wild birds and feeding other wildlife so we could better understand what type of feeding behavior viewers are participating in. And I wanted to pause here and just highlight some of the asterisks we're looking at. All of these asterisks indicate a statistically significant difference between our consumptive and non-consumptive groups, which are those green and purple bars. And they tell us that consumptive viewers were more likely to participate in visiting parks and natural areas, photographing wildlife, taking trips or outings to view wildlife, and feeding other wildlife than non-consumptive viewers. With that overview, I'm going to pass things back to Ashley to review the key insights from the survey.
Great, thanks, Emily. So hopefully all have a better sense of just broad characteristics of our survey sample. And as Emily said, we've split our insights into 5 key areas. So let me cover what those are first, so you have an idea of where we're heading. So first of all, we really wanted to focus in on ways that you could better support wildlife viewers in New Mexico. As Ginny set out from the beginning, that was a goal of this effort. So there's 3 key areas in which we cover that based upon the survey results. One, in thinking about how to provide more wildlife viewing information and access, because you'll see that that was a really strong need that came out in the survey. The other one, promoting around the home viewing opportunities, because that also came out strongly. And then third, developing social support networks for wildlife viewers, because you'll see that that plays a key role in wildlife viewing. And additionally, we also are going to spell out some potential recommendations tied to broadening the relevance to wildlife viewers who do not hunt and fish. So if the agency thinks about focusing in on that group of folks that they might not have as strong a relationship with already, what would be the way to do so, and what might be some differences that we see there? And then also thinking about how to develop financial contribution opportunities for wildlife viewers. So I'm going to get started on this first item here. So we asked our respondents what were the top, or what were the ways in which New Mexico game and fish could provide them with better support for their wildlife viewing activities. And the responses that we most commonly saw are listed here. Top one being more information on where to go to see wildlife. And then our second one's also related to information, more information about wildlife in New Mexico. So what wildlife are there? And then we see a little bit of a shift here. Our only one not related to information is about 43% of people said they were interested in access to more places to go wildlife viewing. And then again, more information about how to view wildlife. And then this last one's sort of a mix between the information and possibly an access piece too. So more information about where and when to view wildlife where there's no hunting occurring. Given that we've heard through focus groups that some viewers say that they prefer not to be in a location where there's hunting occurring. We included that on the survey as well. So you can see information and access coming up as a really key part. So there's really a desire for New Mexico Department of Game and Fish to play a role as an information source in wildlife viewing in New Mexico. And the state agency's website, of course, is already starting to play that role with a series of links on birding, citizen science opportunities, bird-related information, and then also the Southwest Birding Trail. And it seems to us, based upon these results, that continuing to put effort into communicating about those, expanding awareness of the resources in New Mexico, continuing to build out this information could really encourage enhanced participation in wildlife viewing in New Mexico, and could also really add to the satisfaction of that group of viewers in thinking that their state agency is providing them with really useful resources tied to viewing. And so I think a key thing for you all to keep in mind, you may say, well, why do they need information so much? Most of the viewers that I talk to, or the birders that I run into, like, they can tell me where to go see wildlife. Keep in mind that we talked to a broad public that was interested in viewing. And when we did so, you see that the majority of people who describe themselves as viewers in the state are beginner or novice viewers. It's actually 68% of the statewide sample. It's slightly more of the non-consumptive viewers as well, as compared to the consumptive viewers. So even though the viewers that you may bump into, or that may be coming and having their voice heard in agency meetings, may be those more advanced or intermediate birders, there are a lot of beginners and novices out there, and they were responding to this survey. So of course that may help explain why there's so much information interest. So we also asked folks what way would they like to receive information, and receiving information through your website was of interest to about half the sample. I think an important thing to keep in mind, and if anyone's from the communications team on the call today, you're well aware that people come to websites when they're pushed to websites. So if they're Googling wildlife viewing, you hope that they'll find you. But then also, if there's ways for your links to your website to get out to people even more actively, so that you can encourage them to come to new content that you've created on your website, that can be really helpful. And you can see that email updates are also of great interest to people. So that can be a way to push them to longer blog articles or resources that you've created. And then the good old-fashioned print materials were still of interest to people. And so we defined that broadly, but seems that there is still information in that paper-based resource for people to hear more about what your agency's up to and where they can go viewing. And then in terms of thinking about improving access, since that also came up as an area of interest, almost half of our respondents came from urban areas with a population of 50,000 or more. And so thinking about connecting people to those birding trail locations that are in urban areas or near urban areas can really be a way to make that connection to, a broad population of your wildlife viewers. And interestingly, in fact, 2/3 of wildlife viewers reported that they were participating in wildlife viewing on state managed lands. Now, of course, we did not distinguish between wildlife viewing or wildlife management areas or state managed lands like state parks, given that we know that there's a lot of confusion anyways amongst folks on those different types of lands. But there does seem to be a lot of use and interest there, and making sure people are aware of the places that they can have access that are not particularly far from where they are. And the reason I bring that up is illustrated here on this next slide. When we ask people what are their top barriers to wildlife viewing participation, lack of time, lack of money, and then the distance to those viewing locations were the things that came out, with more than 50% of our respondents agreeing that those were barriers for each of those. And so all of those can be better addressed by having viewing being really proximate to viewers. And so it doesn't take them as much time, doesn't cost them as much money, especially now when gas prices are so high, and they don't have to have as long of a distance to the viewing locations, which is a perfect opportunity for me to turn back over to Emily, who's going to talk even more about that close by viewing.
Yeah. So insight number 2 is to promote around the home viewing opportunities. We asked our respondents where they like to view wildlife, and the number 1 location for viewing wildlife was on my own home or property, with almost 70% of wildlife viewers indicating where they view. There's also some interest in locally managed areas, where 63% of our respondents reported participating in viewing, as well as on those state managed areas. Right now, the NMDGF is promoting around the home wildlife viewing on the website through this partner project, the Great Backyard Bird Count, as well as encouraging wildlife viewers to look at the ABQ Backyard Refuge Program to support habitat in their own homes. One thing that we proposed to have an increased communication about around the home viewing opportunities is just to add a wildlife viewing tab on the website. Here's where the agency could consolidate information it already has on the website about birding, bird feeding, and maintaining habitat. This could also be an area to build out more of that information about wildlife viewing that we've seen our respondents and wildlife viewers in New Mexico are really interested in receiving from the agency. Insight 3 from the survey was to develop social support networks for wildlife viewers. This report talks more about the importance of promoting social support and promoting wildlife viewing for historically underserved groups like Black, Indigenous, and people of colors. We also examined the importance of family and friends in supporting wildlife viewing. We found that viewers reported they felt the least support from mentors, which could be a potential opportunity for NMDGF to promote more wildlife viewing, mentorship, and partner programs. Another social support group we looked at was those that experienced accessibility challenges. Accessibility challenges is defined as the difficulties someone experiences when interacting with a physical or social environment when engaging in a meaningful activity such as birding. These may be the result of mobility challenges, blindness or low vision, intellectual or developmental disabilities, mental illness, being deaf or hard of hearing, or other health concerns. This is a definition from Birdability, a nonprofit that works on helping disabled birders engage more meaningfully in wildlife viewing. In New Mexico, we found that 35% of wildlife viewers experience somewhat, quite a bit, or a great deal of these accessibility challenges when viewing. This is another audience that the agency could work to connect with more. One tool or resource that we found, which is great to look at, is the Birdability map. Birdability is a user-based map where members upload wildlife viewing areas and trails that they found to be accessible for disabled birders. This is the map we pulled from New Mexico, and Christy will put the link in the chat. And this is just one way of showing areas in New Mexico where wildlife viewers with or without disabilities are finding good locations to participate in the activity. With that, I'll pass it back over to Ashley for Insight 4.
All right, so this is one that I think of the common phrase when I was growing up about make new friends, but keep the old. One is silver and the other is gold. And I think that this is a really key opportunity for the state agency to consider wildlife viewing. So as you promote more wildlife viewing opportunities, as Emily shared previously, about half the sample of people who responded to us also engage in hunting and fishing, particularly the fishing side of things, and also wildlife viewing. So they're going to benefit from wildlife viewing opportunities that your state offers and makes easier for them to find. But there's also this opportunity to reach out to this new group of potential friends that you can also make a connection to. And I'm going to talk some here about how you can really think about reaching out to that new group of viewers. And they're not necessarily new themselves. And in some cases, in some ways, your agency has been working with them. But as a shortcut of describing it, the group that you could really broaden your relevance to, the non-consumptive viewers who don't hunt, they don't fish, but they are into some type of wildlife viewing. And they do have different perceptions of and experiences with the State Fish and Wildlife Agency. So we asked viewers, the whole group, how familiar are you with NMDGF? And we didn't give the acronym, we spelled it out. And we do have a statistically significant difference here between the consumptive and non-consumptive group. So again, that statewide group is showing both of them together. But if we look at the consumptive and non-consumptive groups, we see the darker colors where you have higher levels of familiarity are where I have those green boxes around the sample, the consumptive group. So they have higher levels of familiarity than the non-consumptive group, where you can see those lighter levels of gray are adding up to more than 50% of people are saying they're not at all familiar or only slightly familiar with the agency. So it really is that this non-consumptive group of viewers would be your opportunity to make new friends for your agency. Similarly, we had a question in there related to the logo for your State Fish and Wildlife Agency. And we asked people, have you seen this logo before? And again, we found that that group of consumptive viewers was much more likely to say that they'd seen the logo before than the non-consumptive viewers, with 80% versus 56%. And then we specifically dug in on programs and services that your agency offers. And we were interested in whether or not people have participated in or used any of these services in the past 5 years. What I want to call your attention to is that arrow down on the bottom of my list. And you can see that 56% of the non-consumptive viewers have had no experience with NMDGF programs or services in the past 5 years, while it's only 25% of people saying the same who are consumptive viewers. And you can also see the patterns in their participation, getting information about wildlife. The consumptive viewers are the group that's most likely to be getting that. Again, you can see these patterns of statistical difference between the non-consumptive and consumptive group. We aren't comparing them to that statewide group that we have as a baseline on the top. But you can see again and again, for every single one of those categories, the consumptive group is getting more experience and exposure to those services and programs that the agency offers. And similarly, what sort of purchases or contributions have you made in the past 5 years? So working with Ginny and along with her peers from other state agencies who are involved in the projects, we came up with a list of the typical ways that state agencies receive funding from the public. And you can see here again, consumptive users, much longer bar in terms of the ways that they are currently contributing or have contributed in the last 5 years to the agency. The fishing license being the highest there, not surprising, because we said that that consumptive viewer group is mostly made up of anglers. But there's no place in which the consumptive group is even higher, but that's not surprising here because most of these opportunities would be ones that are targeted at the more of a consumptive group, maybe with the exception of something like an event or program. And then here we have more of the voluntary type mechanisms in which people can contribute to the agency. You can see that those bars for both groups are not as long, but still we see that pattern of the consumptive group is contributing more in the voluntary way as well. So whether it be buying voluntary conservation or habitat stamps, giving an income tax donation, direct donation of money, or a donation of land, again, that consumptive group is the highest across the board. So it's important, I think, to think about that the benefits to the current constituents who also view wildlife, there could be a lot of overlap. So there's really some common ground in terms of what they feel is the agency's level of prioritization of programs and services for wildlife viewing. And a third of them are saying that it's too low or far too low. And they believe that more should be done to help prioritize programs for viewing. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit from making those comparisons, I want to really focus in just on this financial contribution opportunity. I already showed you one slide along those lines, but as you think about what might be opportunities to expand in that way, since we saw that viewers aren't contributing very much to the voluntary mechanisms, and the non-consumptive viewers aren't contributing very much to any of the opportunities. So we asked people if these things existed. Now, some of them already do exist, but they might not be aware of it. Would you be interested in contributing in this way? And this is where we saw a lot more interest than we're actually seeing in terms of current behavior, which I think is really good news, because it shows that through concerted marketing, through concerted efforts to get the word out, to make sure that people saw the value, you might be able to get more participation in these financial mechanisms. So 64% of people were interested in a land access pass, permit, or entrance fee. Similar amount were interested in fees for a program or event. And then a fishing license, of course, was of interest to a lot of folks, both those who've been previously buying them as well as some others. There was also really strong interest in tangible products, such as gear that folks might be interested in buying. Could also be a way then to build the awareness of your logo and your agency if that gear included that on it. Also interest in something like a conservation lottery ticket and state income tax donation was of interest, but only to a third of people. So we're starting to see a lower percentage there than we saw with some of those other options. And I think it's important to think about how all of these options would need to be tailored to the interests of people. So if we talk about engaging wildlife viewers who do not hunt or fish and supporting the agency, in some ways, I think it's going to require rethinking current funding models and options. One example that we've talked about a lot within the steering committee for this project is an approach that Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources has been piloting, since we actually did a study with them several years ago that was very similar to this one. And they have created the Restore the Wild program, which is a donation opportunity for people to provide funds to the agency for habitat-specific projects. And they've really tried to tailor that towards people who are not currently contributing to the agency. So you can see they chose to have a heron as their picture here, a species that a lot of people are familiar with seeing and have strong interest in. And having a wildlife viewer specific funding mechanism can really be a way to increase that connection with viewers too, and show that there's interest in providing programming or habitat that is of interest to those people in your state. All right, you can move forward, Emily. Great. So in terms of thinking about next steps, as Emily mentioned at the beginning, we have these state reports, such as your state report, the first one out. There's also going to be a national/regional report. It has national level data as well as split up by region. And that should be coming out in the next month. So you can also take a look at that. I do want to call out that something that could be really of interest to you all is within that regional report, there's going to be case studies on about like 6 to 8. I don't know the exact number. Emily can add it in the chat. Examples of different state agencies across the country who've done things like have part of lottery funds go towards supporting programs for viewers, or the Restore the Wild example. So some of those case studies are called out in there if that is something that your agency is interested in pursuing or your organization is interested in pursuing. Can provide an opportunity for you to see how others have done it and also get in touch with them. As Emily also mentioned, the data set for this project is de-identified, so it doesn't include information about specific individuals who took the survey, but does include their responses to all of the questions. And we are in the process of working with our tech team to get that available online, and it will be linked also to where the report is held so that you can go from there over to the data set. And there's lots of opportunity to dig into it even more. Then finally, we have a grant proposal in for another multi-state grant, and we were invited for the full proposal based upon our shorter letter of intent. And we've collaborated with Ginny and her colleagues that are part of our steering committee for this project to get their feedback on this. And that community of project would allow state agencies like yours to get together and work together with other state agencies who are implementing these results and share your expertise, your insights, your resources, your challenges. And we would also work with that community of practice. And the hope is from all of those examples that various states create and the types of programs that they roll out based upon results, we can then have a story map and a website that other states can again see more examples and templates that they can build from as well. So again, trying to not keep reinventing the wheel, but allowing different states to build on the good models that have come from other states. So as I wrap up here, just a reminder that this is the link to the full report. It has a lot more information than what we covered here today and oodles more graphs for those of you who like graphs. We hope, though, that we have not overwhelmed you with too many graphs and that we've struck the right balance between lots of info, but then also trying to make sure it's digestible and that we hit the key points for you. And we're happy to take questions now. We're also happy to field any additional comments that anyone has. Anyone wants to share some ideas of what stands out to them as next steps. And then we also are providing our contact information here for Emily, me, or for Ginny, if you'd like to talk with any of us more offline of this presentation. With that, maybe I'll start by turning it over to Ginny and see if there's anything, Ginny, that you were hoping to emphasize that came out of the results. And if not, we can go to questions.
For sure. No, thank you so much, Ashley and Emily and Christy. You guys have done such a nice job, and that was a really great overview. And I think from my side of things, one thing I would like to emphasize is that Restore the Wild program that you referenced from Virginia Tech. That program has different membership levels associated with it. And so anyone who is interested in gaining access to Virginia, state properties can purchase the level of membership that's appropriate for them. And there's other benefits depending on the level of membership that's selected, including tours of wildlife management areas that are run by department personnel. And I think if we could move towards implementing something like that in New Mexico, that would be a really great first step. We could very easily emphasize access to our state properties here in New Mexico, our wildlife management areas. We have a good network of those across the state. And, we could really we could for example, put together a nice passport booklet that talks about the different properties, talks about the different types of wildlife you can see on our properties, and encourage people to visit once they've purchased a membership level that's appropriate for them, and really emphasize the wildlife viewing potential on our properties, especially those that are a bit better developed and have more infrastructure to support wildlife viewing. So I think there's a lot of other potential takeaways, but that one really had stood out to me. And I think also we could potentially do something as simple as have a Share with Wildlife license plate that really emphasizes a species that is of interest to wildlife viewers. We've been doing new Share with Wildlife license plates every few years. The last one was a roadrunner, which is our state bird. But I think we could do much better to focus on species that wildlife viewers might be really interested in. So I turn it back over to you guys.
All right, thanks so much, Jenny, for your perspective on that. And Emily did provide in the chat pod a link to Virginia's Restore the Wild program for anyone who wants to see more about those membership levels and benefits that they provide, and then also how they message about it. So I see Jan's asking a question about, is there research on the draw that the wildlife viewing has on tourism in New Mexico? For example, the Festival of the Cranes at the Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge. So we only surveyed viewers within the state. And we did look at how much people viewed at their home as compared to viewing within other areas of the state. So we have information on how much that was occurring. And as Emily said, the around the home piece was most common. There certainly is a lot of viewing interest in your state. In fact, I've been to Bosque del Apache when I was a grad student at Colorado State University just to see your cranes. And you drew me from Colorado to come down there and see those cranes. But that wasn't part of our focus. My guess would be that possibly Fish and Wildlife Service has some estimates on that, but I don't know. And I don't know if anyone from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is on the call. Or Ginny, if you're aware of any other economic analyses.
I don't have specific data. Obviously, we're one of the states that has an outdoor recreation division. And part of why that was developed was because outdoor recreation, including wildlife viewing, is definitely a big part of New Mexico's economy. But unfortunately, I don't have a specific number that I could share at this point.
It looks like Emily just did some Googling and found a study that focuses on some of that valuation. And Janine also added in that the Friends of Bosque have some information on that for folks who are interested. And certainly a good point being raised that there are values added to an agency focusing on wildlife viewing, because that can also bring in people from outside of the state that could contribute even more to the economy within the state. Other questions?
Could I make a few comments, please?
Go for it.
I'm Wally Hausman. I'm a retired game and fish employee since 1999. So I've been retired almost as many years as I was an employee. What you folks have done here is an extremely important quantification of people in New Mexico who have an interest in wildlife and wildlife management, who don't have a really clear mechanism to participate in that system. And that's just an inherent bias that's existed forever in New Mexico Game and Fish, and probably in most state wildlife agencies throughout the country. So I'm just sitting here in awe at the quantification of the distinction between consumptive and non-consumptive users here. This is fantastic. Ginny, everybody in Game and Fish needs to see this information. They need to absorb it, digest it. The commissioners need to see this. Our legislators, our governor needs to see this. The hindrances to engaging with non-consumptive users in a meaningful way for them as citizens and beneficiaries of New Mexico's wildlife is really a political issue, and it always has been. And one of my dreams, I guess, as an employee for so many years and since, has been that stakeholders, wildlife stakeholders in New Mexico could find a way to overcome their political differences and find a way to cooperatively manage New Mexico's wildlife for the benefit of New Mexico's citizens, rather than be so heavily influenced by economic and industry political influences on how wildlife gets managed. So I don't know how to take this forward. Jenny, you're probably in a better position these days than I, for sure. But other public groups, nonprofit groups, New Mexico Wildlife Federation, New Mexico Wild. There's dozens and dozens of stakeholders in New Mexico who have an interest in wildlife. This information really needs to be widely distributed and entered into the conversation about the future of wildlife management in New Mexico. So I applaud your results and your efforts here. This is terrific. Thank you for letting me speak.
Well, thanks so much for your comments. It's great to hear that you see the value in this, particularly given your long-term perspective in the agency and also beyond your time in the agency. I'll turn it to Ginny and see if Ginny wants to respond in any way, or if anyone else has ideas related to Wally's suggestion that there's the need to get this out even more broadly.
No, I really appreciate your comments, Wally, and I totally agree that this information needs to be distributed widely. And, you know, I mean, I would love to see a presentation come in front of the commission about this. It's not currently in the works, but, you know, I agree that that would be sort of a starting forum to more broadly distribute it. And, you know, the information has been shared with a couple of the groups that you mentioned, including National Wildlife Federation and, you know, Defenders of Wildlife. I know they're on the call today, and Wildlands Network is here. But yes, there's a lot more that needs to be done to share the information out. And I will definitely be working on doing that.
I also wanted to add that we have been recording the webinar, and we'll be providing a link to that for Ginny. So if anyone does wish to share it with any other colleagues or any other organizations, I know sometimes it can be a little tedious watching recordings of webinars, but if it is helpful, Ginny will have that from us soon, and or you can reach out to Emily directly to get that, and you're welcome to share it. See Jen making a comment that there's been legislation to encourage outdoor classrooms. And so potentially connecting in with schools could be a good thing to do there. And then Leland Pierce is making a comment about the need to also think about federal colleagues and thinking about how viewing can also be encouraged on their lands and being part of the discussion and movement. I might pause for a second and say, when we did a similar project in Virginia, it led to a spin-off project, or I guess in some ways they were sort of happening simultaneously. A spin-off isn't the best way of saying it, but we use this sort of survey information to then work with a group of stakeholders across the entire state. Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources funded us to be the facilitators of that. And that group worked together to then come up with a wildlife viewing plan for the state agency for the next 10 years, and was presented to what is the commission in Virginia. Has a different name though, and got full endorsement from them. And now the state agency's second in command is actually the lead on that wildlife viewing plan implementation. And I know every state has different politics, and in some states that's an easier lift, but just to again give you some inspiration that this sort of effort can lead to a broader cohort of people working together to advance wildlife viewing within the state, and specifically the state agency, and getting more buy-in. Any other comments, questions? All right, well, with that, we'll wrap things up. Feel free to jot down our email addresses, and we're happy to follow up with you if you do have questions. We hope that this work can be useful and will spur action in New Mexico. And if we can help in any way, also do let us know. So thanks again for your time today. Jenny, anything you want to add before we leave?
I just want to thank everyone again for joining today. And Ashley, you and your team have done such a great job. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Jenny. It's been great working with you. All right, everyone, take care. Bye-bye.